Hey, so here's something I've learned about myself. I am not particularly good at predicting how I will feel about something and think about those kind of things in the future. I greatly overestimate my ability to do this, although now I'm duly humbled. If you had told me 10 years ago that I would no longer be a progressive, but would actually be center right, and would no longer be a fervent atheist, but actually be a moderate Christian, I would not have believed either of those at all. I would have given the probability of either of those things coming true. I would have had the probability really, really low, and now they are both true. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about why many of us often start off politically left leaning, but move to the right as we get older. There's going to be lots of reasons I go over. And in a future video, I should do this. I might do this. I might do a video on what flipped me from atheism to being a moderate, highly unorthodox Christian. I'll probably do that eventually. I've already done it on a podcast with my church. I can just do it again. Anyhow, you sometimes hear the expression, and I think this was a Winston Churchill one. If you're in your 20s and you're not a liberal, you have no heart. But if you're in your 30s and you're still a liberal, you have no brain. So, we're going to be talking about why do people move left to right. But before we do that, let's start off by just trying to get a better idea of what it means to be left and right. Because it's really hard to define these terms precisely, as they encompass a lot of different things, and because it's like what it means to be a liberal, for example, now is not the same thing as what it meant even just 10 years ago. So it can be hard to pin down, but I'll give a few approaches. So one is from dictionary.com, where the word left is applied to people and groups that have liberal views. That generally means they support progressive reforms, especially those seeking greater social and economic equality. The word right, in contrast, refers to people or groups that have conservative views. That generally means that they are disposed to preserving existing conditions and institutions, or that they want to restore traditional ones and to limit change. So that is one way of looking at this. Another is that I really like is from Jordan Peterson, where he talks about how the right tends to support tradition and hierarchy, and both of these can absolutely be valid. With tradition, it's like if something has worked decently well for a long time for a lot of people, and it has been pretty stable, and so forth, we should be really careful when it comes to deviation. Just like in evolution, most mutations are harmful or neutral, and only a few are helpful. So our new idea, for example, it may not be anywhere near as easily implementable as we think it is, or it may have unintended consequences, unforeseen consequences, and so forth. And then also maybe some of these things that we're thinking of changing are serving functions that we don't realize they're serving. So I'll give an example that was revealed to me a few weeks ago from a person on the Bridges of Meaning Discord. He talked about how in Jewish law you cannot drive on the Sabbath, and this has a few implications. One is it means that Jewish people that are actively participating Jewish people, they need to be within walking distance of their synagogue because they can't drive there on Sabbath. And that also, so in addition, if all the Jewish people in a community are living close to the synagogue, it also means they're living close to each other. And so this is a way of keeping the community glued together, which is very constructive. And if there were more like a reformist, progressive Jewish movement, which there has been, that would do away with these kind of rules. And it makes sense why they would. It is kind of oppressive to say you can't drive on this day of the week. But they might be disappointed to notice over time that their community loses strength and integrity. That's an example there of sometimes you don't realize what you're removing. The right also tends to be in support of hierarchy, so long as the hierarchy is largely and ideally fully legitimate. And this is because such a hierarchy is good for many reasons. One can say there's no basis for a hierarchy that is more legitimate and hard to argue against than merit. Like if you are actually better than others at something, nothing is more fair than you getting the job to do that thing. And the people that don't get the job, they'll at least see the legitimacy. It's like you didn't just get the job because you're more handsome than them or because your uncle was in charge of hiring. It's probably the most legitimate way of doing things. So hierarchies that are based on competence are largely good. However, going back to the traditions, not all traditions are optimal solutions, nor are they necessarily as suitable today as they were historically. So a key role of the left is to question tradition and question the continued validity of particular traditions. And then also, moving on back to hierarchy, any hierarchy can and probably will become corrupted, and it should be a joint responsibility of the left and the right to protect against things like cronyism, nepotism, price fixing, and so forth. But moving on, even the most valid and pure competence-based hierarchy is going to leave a certain segment of people behind. It doesn't matter what the domain is. There's going to be some people that are really, really below average at performing in that. And it's going to leave those people behind. And those people obviously are still people. They need a voice. And that is one of the critical roles of the left. And that, as I've mentioned in previous videos, is why I have a special loathing for the Democratic Party, because I believe that they pretend to be this, but they are not that. They are the functional political equivalent of a union negotiator who's been secretly bought off by management to negotiate badly on purpose on behalf of the employees. That is what they are. They will talk. They will minimize their talk and their constructive efforts towards things like lowering drug prices and whatnot. But they will talk endlessly about gender pronouns and things like that, things that are free to defend. And likewise, Republicans are they're not much better or better at all at this. They will talk about abortion and critical race theory and things like that, which are important, but they become these buzz like hot button issues that people vote based on. And it's like, I'm going to vote for this person because they're pro-life, or I'm going to vote for this person because they're pro-choice, and then barely even notice that they are completely abandoning you in terms of the economy and so forth. So there are valid roles for the left and the right. And ideally, the left and the right balance each other out, so long as they're able to talk with each other regularly and constructively. The left keeps the right from keeping us all stuck and stubborn, and the right keeps the left from us being recklessly overzealous and making changes. And ideally, they both fight against corruption. Ideally. So that's a bit of an introduction to left and right, obviously non-comprehensive, but let's get into why do so many of us start more left and move more right. I did not foresee that coming. When I was a 27-year-old Young Turks watching fanatic, new atheist and all that, I never would have thought I would have been moved to the center right and moved into the church. But in this video, let's focus on the left to right movement. So there's a lot of explanations I've come up with for this, and I'm going to go through I'm going to go through all of them. So the first is personality. So personality-wise, it's known for anyone who watches Jordan Peterson videos, they probably have heard many times that people on the left are often disproportionately open to new ideas and experiences. And, this is consistent with youth, as youth is a time of exploration and, figuring things out. But as you explore, you start figuring out more and more for yourself. And as this happens over time, the need and perhaps even the desire to explore as actively goes down. As you get older, there are more and more ideas and experiences that you can quickly rule out given your prior experience with them or things like them, your increased knowledge of yourself, and so forth. So that right there is a pretty significant contributing factor, I would imagine, as to why people who are younger tend to be more left-leaning. And then move right as they get a little older. Now, conservatives, on the other hand, people on the right, they tend to, on average, have more respect and loyalty for tradition than do people on the left. Why? Well, for one, you could say it's all they've ever known, right? Like, for example, how would imagine, like, let's like externalize this so we can look at it in a detached way. A lot of people, they criticize conservatives for being like xenophobic and whatnot. But let's consider this. Imagine you have a small Mexican village that has really kept to like the old, it's kept its heritage. Grandma, like people still live in connection with like their grandparents, and so they have a deep connection with the enduring culture of Mexico. It's a very Mexican place in Mexico. And then maybe it starts getting developed as a new hotspot for tourism. And so they start building a bunch of hotels. And then all of a sudden there are Starbucks and McDonald's popping up all over the place. And more people are speaking English. And it's like the fabric of this community is being significantly changed very quickly. How many of us would be criticize and be angry at a Mexican 50-year-old for being upset because everything they've ever known in terms of their culture is being diluted and compromised, and they can't get it back unless they leave everything they know and go to a different part of Mexico, and then maybe the same thing happens there too. I think that's extremely understandable. And it's like, let's say you're on the left and you've lived in a hip area, a hip progressive area in Toronto or Boston for 15 years or so. And then what happens if a whole bunch of older conservatives start moving in high numbers? And so maybe you start, you start getting Jehovah's Witnesses knocking on your door 3 times more often than you're used to. And, vintage stores start getting replaced by Bible stores, and nightclubs get supplanted by churches. It's like, that's going to be a culture shock, and you're probably going to want to go back to the way things were. And that makes sense. And it's nothing wrong with wanting that. And I think that's a very big thing, exactly. It's like a person grows up in a certain way, like a certain culture. And if that changes radically, it can be disorienting, chaos-inducing, and stressful, and make the person long for the days of yore. But when you're younger, I think it's a different kind of thing. When you're younger, you aren't nearly as attached to the traditions because you've been engaged in them for far less time. So this can make you more likely to be open to change because you don't feel as much of a sense of familiarity and comfort with the current system. And so to give like a stark example, I've mentioned before that I've spent a bit of time teaching English in Korea, lived there for over a year. If there was some major aspect of Korean culture that was changing when I was there, like, it probably wouldn't have affected me in the slightest because I just got there. So it's not like I had gotten used to anything else, right? But it might bother a lot of Korean people a whole lot, especially the older ones, because this is kind of like, their deck is being reshuffled in a way that it's never been shuffled in their entire life before, and it's kind of bewildering. Another thing that might be motivating conservatives is what economists call loss aversion. We feel losses more keenly than we feel gains. So, for example, if you find $100 on the street, you're not going to be as happy as you would be upset if you lost $100, right? So, with in this case here, it's like maybe people on the right, they might be limited by loss aversion because they are comparing what currently is to the potentially serious adverse effects that change could cause. And a lot of us do this. Like, when we're unsure of things, we tend to stay where we are. Like, it's almost like it's the devil kind of thing. And so, like, you need a good argument to start doing things differently. When in doubt, people tend to stay put. And that's a part of the reason why I think there's a lot of, like, propaganda to, like, muddy the waters. Like, things like tobacco companies decades ago, like putting out, like trotting out scientists saying that like cigarettes do nothing bad for your lungs. Like if they can create enough doubt in the population, then people's inclination is probably going to be just let's stay where we are, which basically means no significant regulations against cigarettes. But if you're younger, on the other hand, so whereas the conservative older person might be more prone to loss aversion, a younger person, it might be easier for them to take for granted what we have already as mere default settings. Like, I think a very good thing to do is to watch a show like The Walking Dead, because you start realizing how much we have. Like, I would say the most precious resource we have, other than the basic things like air and water, is trust. Like, the fact that we have trust in our society is so massive. Trust is what lets you take your car into the mechanic's office, leave and run some errands with almost complete certainty that no one's going to steal your car while you're doing that. Or if you're wealthy enough to have help cleaning your home, you can leave your home while the person is in here cleaning it up, and you will know with almost certainty that they will not steal anything. Like, these kind of things, like, imagine how much less efficient society would be if we always had to watch over our things and all that kind of stuff, because we just could not trust people. And in shows like The Walking Dead, all of those sorts of assumptions are wiped off the map by necessity. The structures of society, there is no more First Amendment, no more free speech, none of those. There are no rules anymore, and people are in a sort of a kill or be killed, in a whole bunch of prisoner's dilemma situations where, like, one person might be thinking, I don't want to kill that person, but they might kill me if I don't kill them. And I don't know that they're not going to. And each person thinks that, and so maybe they have to both go kill each other because each one of them doesn't know the other one's not going to kill themselves, but neither of them actually want to do it. But if you've been born and raised in a place like Canada in the United States, a place like that, all you've ever seen is relative social order. High degrees of interpersonal trust relative to how bad things can get. And so you might just, like, it's easy to take these as like default settings of nature and to underappreciate them and realize that they are not in any way guaranteed to us. And so whereas a person who is a little older and has seen, news stories of what's happened when countries' power structures have collapsed and there becomes things like power vacuums and all that kind of thing, they see how bad things can get. They're comparing a pretty good thing to that. Whereas maybe a younger person who's more likely to be on the left is comparing it to like a utopian ideal of perfection, which obviously no system we can create is ever going to live up to. So that was another angle to look at this. Now let's move on to economics. So younger people tend to be more economically left, and well, let's look at your situation when you're young. When you're young, your economic situation has almost nothing or absolutely nothing, often the second, nothing to do with you and everything to do with your parents. Parents that you did not choose or earn the rights to have. So whether you're rich or poor or anywhere in between, you don't deserve it. Like, you were born into a particular context, and that's all there is to it. And so from this perspective, why wouldn't a young person think that it's unjust that they and their friends may be grossly unequal in their burdens and privileges, based purely on blind luck? And this is totally understandable and totally defensible, and it's valid. And I think that should be in any consideration of economic policy as one of the very valid things you have to bear in mind. But as we start getting older, maybe we start seeing the role of merit shining through more and more. Maybe those people who worked very hard in school, sacrificed good times, in the interest of setting themselves up for a good future, things like financial sustainability, stability, and so forth. Maybe they would start feeling resentful about being forced to subsidize people who did not make those same sacrifices. Is it not a disincentive to being responsible if you know that at the end of the day, if you're not responsible, some more responsible person will be forced to bail you out. This too is also valid, and of course, I'm not for a second saying that everyone, or even that everyone who is down on their financial luck is there because of their own. Like it could be, maybe they were born with a disability. Maybe they have emotion regulation problems that are extremely difficult for them to deal with. Maybe they had a poor family upbringing. Like, just because someone's not doing well, it doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, it's just because they're lazy slackers or something. So I'm not saying that. But still, you get the point where the person, feels like who's been making all these sacrifices, maybe they feel bitter that now they have to give some of their money to people who didn't. That is also a valid consideration. And another thing is, as you get older, your socioeconomic productivity comes to be directly tied to your social status, your life opportunities, and the security of yourself as well as your family. So maybe you are less willing to part with tax dollars because now it's actually affecting you if you struggle to afford to pay it. And I think you can get a lot of young left-leaning people to sort of get like some level of an experience similar to this, where you say to them, okay, you got 88% on your English final. This other person over here only got 45. Can you give them 5 of your percent so that they don't have to fail? Well, I think a lot of people would be resentful about that, because if they got 88, they feel like they earned that 88, and why didn't that person who got 45 study harder? So those are some economic explanations there. And now I'm going to get to the last section of explanations, which is that in a lot of ways, youth is all about you, right? As you get older, things start being far less about you and more about what you can and should do for others. So like when you're in school, it's a series of well-defined problems with an upward trajectory, and everything, even the things that you dislike, is about your development. So like you may be taking a statistics class and you may not like the statistics class, but the idea is that still this is about your development. And what I meant by well-defined problems, so there's well-defined problems and ill-defined problems, and some gray in between. A well-defined problem is where basically, here's where I am, here's where I want to get to. So your starting point, your desired end point, and you have a clear path to get to that, right? So in school, well-defined problems. 6th grade leads to 7th grade. Studying harder predictably leads to better grades. Things like that. There's all these if-then conditionals that are quite clear and dependable. And you also know when your promotions are coming. You know when you're going to get your grades. You know when you are or are not going to pass on to the next grade, or when it's time to start applying to colleges, things like that. And then also, it's inherently progressive, not in the political sense, but in the sense that it's progress oriented. Like grade 8, that is further along than grade 7. University is further along than high school, right? And so you have this sense of like you can't make progress until you establish what the goal is. Well, here there's a built-in goal structure. Now, when you get older, things get a lot different. So, for example, once you start joining the workforce, it's no longer about you and your development. Like that's secondary to what you can do for the company. No longer about you. Next, like things are, when you're in school, you pretty much know you're in the right place, right? Like what else are you going to do when you're 14, right? But once you leave school and start working, it's like you can't at all know that are you in the right career? Are you with the right company? Are you in the right role? Like all those kind of things, all that's up in the air. And then also it's like the upward trajectory isn't nearly as predictable. It's like you know exactly when the final test is going to be that's going to determine if you get into the next grade. But you have no idea when or if your next opportunity for a promotion is going to come up, because you have no idea when the person above you in the organization is going to leave the company or get promoted themselves or whatever else. And then you'll probably get to the point where there are no more promotions available to you, and it's like, all right, now you're just going to stay at this level forever. There is no more upward growth, or maybe there is, but you don't want it. So it's no longer all about you. There is no longer a predictable upward path There's no more certainty or near certainty that you're even on the right path. And yeah, really, it's not about you. And so and this can be a shock to people. Like there's something called a quarter life crisis, and this probably is part of why for it. We're being forced by necessity to demote your sort of idol of self, and you have to start finding meaning and purpose and wisdom elsewhere. You are no longer the center of the universe anywhere near to the degree that you had been raised to kind of feel like you are. And so once a person gets to this point of crisis, they might start noticing that our culture is one of hyper individualism and rapid change. And so this could let them start to think, maybe I need to start going back to older wisdom, to older ways of doing things, and things like religious community, and intact families and all that kind of stuff. Maybe you have kids, and now there are other people that you're putting above yourself in the order of priority. And so you have to start thinking about them. And maybe when you start feeling less fulfilled by like the hyper individualistic culture we live in, especially when it's being shown to you repeatedly that this is no longer as much about you as it used to be when you were in the developmental phase of your life. And maybe you realize the people your own age are going through similar problems. Maybe then you start talking to your parents more, especially when you yourself have kids, and your grandparents, looking back for their wisdom, and so forth, as to because they went through a similar transition themselves. It might not have been the exact same thing because the times were different, but that wisdom helps. And so it's like, once again, like that can lead a person to start moving more in the conservative direction. So these are a bunch of things that I think are contributing to this transition. If you have any others that you could think of, please talk about it in the comment section. And my next episode is going to be about why is atheism overrepresented on university campuses, and it's going to have a lot of relevance, or it's going to take a fair bit from this video's content. But I'll leave that mysterious for now, and I hope to see you for that one.